Welcome to the Believe Podcast, a conversation between friends over a passage of Scripture. I'm Carolyn Kirsten.
And I'm Marvin Williams.
And today is episode 170. I like those tens, those zeros. That's kind of fun. We are wrapping up Ephesians chapter 2 today.
All right. So this is one of those deeper questions.
Okay.
So how do a person's upbringing and family connections give them specific advantages?
I think that's huge, actually.
Yeah.
And I think the older I get and the more I know different people, I realize what a privilege my upbringing was. Even things like knowing how to manage money.
Yeah.
Or buying a house. Not that I'd ever, hadn't done that before, but even education-wise, and valuing education.
Yeah.
As my daughter teaches, in a urban school, and kids just don't even value it because their parents don't value education and sleeping in or sometimes out of necessity, they are missing school. Yeah, I think I did not even realize the significance that upbringing and family connections.
Sure. I mean, exposure. And, there are individuals who have limited exposure, and then there are individuals who have a lot of exposure, whether it's to travel or whether it is to, again, resources, all of those things. So
with LeBron James' son, or not? Is it LeBron's son who's in? Yes,
in the NBA.
Maybe
something.
Can
somebody say nepotism?
Something to do with family connections.
Yeah, I think it has a little bit to do with family connections. So I think we would agree that upbringing, family connections really do foster a level of advantages.
Yeah.
And yet, what we're talking about today. And God is always going to be the opposite of that. He's gonna tell us in what we're talking about today, I don't really care about your family connections. Mm-hmm. I don't care about your upbringing. What really matters is that everyone is kind of on this even playing field, and everyone has to come through Jesus. And so it doesn't matter, whether what we're gonna see, whether you're Jewish or not. It really is what you do with Jesus that matters the most. So let's jump in and dive into what we're looking at today.
Yeah. So Paul starts off with the circumcision issue again, which we talked about in Galatians, but the distinguishing quality between Jews and Gentiles.
Right.
So it is that same kind of we mentioned in the first episode about Ephesians. We are going to be talking about unity in the church.
Absolutely.
We talked about it in Galatians. It clearly is a theme that we need to, all kinds of people need to hear, including us, that the things that we might divide ourselves on are false divisions.
Yeah.
But then we get to verse 14, and Paul cuts through all of that and says, "For he is our peace, who made both groups one, and tore down the dividing wall of hostility."
Yeah. So when we look at this passage, we're looking at two different groups of people: Gentiles who are not Jews, and then you have your Jewish people. Jewish people, in their mind, they thought they had an advantage, which in some sense they did, because they got a chance to know about God as they were raised in their family, But God says, okay, wait a minute. That doesn't necessarily give you a special privilege per se. Even though you think you're near, you're still far off. And then you have the Gentiles over here who those who believe in Jesus are grafted into the body of Jesus, but they were far off, but they were brought near in Jesus Christ. And so both had problems. Both had sin problems. Yeah. Both were, you have the Gentiles thinking they were far off, and then God says, I want to bring you near. You have Jews who think they were near, but technically they were far off, and God says, I want to bring you into the family through Jesus. So both were not a part of the family of God. Mm-hmm. one thinking that, okay, I don't have any privilege at all. The other thinking that I have privilege. And God says, okay, wait a minute. Both groups were separated.
Yep.
Both groups have to be brought into the family of God, not based on status, not based on family background, but based on their position in Jesus Christ, their faith in Jesus. Remember back in the last episode, salvation comes not through works, not through your position in family, but it comes through grace by faith in Jesus Christ. Yeah. And this, as you mentioned, cuts through the chase. It's not about privilege. It really is about what you do with Jesus.
He is our peace.
Absolutely.
This makes me, the near and far makes me think of a analogy I remember hearing as a kid about if the challenge was to jump across from North America to Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean, and I attempt it. Well, I would not do very well at all. An Olympic long jumper would certainly be nearer to accomplishment than me,
right,
but would still fall very short. And the point of that was, near or far, there's nothing we can do to earn our salvation. It is a gift. We can't. Even an Olympic long jumper. And that's verse 17. He came and proclaimed the good news of peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near.
Yeah.
There's still, the distance was not crossed. We need Christ. He is our peace.
Yeah. So this is a very, very interesting kind of distinction is when we say Christ is our peace. So there is these two types of peace, if you will. You have peace with God. So we were separated from God. We were enemies of God, and we were at odds with God, if you will. And Jesus comes and he says, I am going to put your hand in God's hand, and now you and God will be at peace with one another. That means you can have a relationship with him. There's nothing that actually separates you from God. We have peace with God. And now then the second one is the peace of God, which is when we're kind of in a topsy-turvy world, we're dealing with all kinds of anxieties, and we feel like our minds are spinning, our hands are sweaty, our hearts are racing, and we don't have peace. We don't have a settledness that God is going to come through. So because we have peace with God, we can also have the knowledge of that he gives us peace with the peace of God, knowing that he is present with us in every situation. And those who are separated from God, they don't know if they really have that or not. They don't have the resource of a God who stands with them in the midst of all kinds of things that are happening. But because we have peace with God, we are assured that that same God is now standing with us in the midst of anxiety. And so I love this concept that he is our peace in terms of giving us peace with God, and we are no longer separated from him.
And he preached peace. I love that. He is our peace. He made peace. He brought peace. He preached peace.
Yeah.
That really is, he is our peace. That is Christ.
And with that peace, we see I think it's in verse 14, he broke down the dividing wall of hostility that existed not only between us and God, but also between you and me, or between people who are different than one another. And that's in reality what happened, but we still have to work for that. Not in working for our salvation, but we still have to work for that peace between one another. And I love that, again, that we are no longer divided because he was the one that broke down that wall.
Verse 19, Paul says, then you are no longer foreigners and strangers, or aliens and strangers, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of God's household. We've talked about identity ideas in the previous episodes, and here's another just visual image of our identity. Fellow citizens with the saints and members of God's household. And I think it is powerful to think of what citizenship the blessings and privileges, responsibilities of citizenship, as well as household membership.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much for our homes, but I think makes me think of like the royal family. There are privileges, which we are.
Yeah.
We are part of God's kingdom family. The privileges, the rights, the responsibilities that come with those identity markers.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this concept of citizenship. We're gonna see it again in Philippians, where Paul says our citizenship is in heaven. Now, again, this dual citizenship, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are citizens of the United States, but our citizenship is also in heaven. And so when we talked about citizenship or being citizens, I immediately thought, I have a number of friends who were immigrants. They came and they went through the process of naturalization, and they are now citizens of the United States. And so, and I've gone to like several of those swearing in ceremonies. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, the joy that they have, and there is an oath that they take, and I want us to read it, and I'll read some of it, and then you can finish it, and then apply this to our citizenship with Jesus, our citizenship in heaven. So this is how this oath goes. I hereby declare an oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law.
That I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law. That I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God.
All right. So obviously, the metaphor kind of breaks down, with the guns and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But the concept is so powerful. Like the very opening lines, I hereby declare an oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure, very strong language, all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been subject or citizen. So we were once, under the allegiance of the prince and the power of the air and of sin and our trespasses. And we're saying, because we know God now through Jesus, we are absolutely renouncing that. And one of the ways we do that is through baptism. I am saying that I am no longer a citizen of the kingdom of Satan, but I am now a citizen of the kingdom of Jesus Christ.
And baptism reflects that being dead in our sins and raised to life, as going down under the water and coming back up too. There's another overlap of those images.
So this again, I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States, again, against all enemies. That for us, that would be our Constitution. I am the Constitution of the Scriptures, Constitution of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. I am submitting my life to the laws and the values of kingdom values, if
living
you will.
God's way.
Living God's way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, talking about this,
it is a powerful analogy when Paul says we're fellow citizens with the saints, thinking of this oath and yes, the privileges that come
absolutely
with being a citizen, but then also the responsibilities or the commitment, the heart commitment, the allegiance, to use a word that they use, that you are also committing to as a citizen. It makes me think in the last episode talking about salvation being a gift and all you have to do is receive it. But there is a receiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
A gift just sitting on the table and neither of us, and we walk out of the room and we just leave it. Well, neither of us received that. There, in the receiving of the gift, in receiving of salvation, there is a identity and that comes with commitments and allegiances as
Yeah.
well.
Again, the responsibilities and privileges.
Yeah.
And again, this last line, and I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. like I am not leaving God. I am not, no matter how tough life becomes, I will not evade. I will not leave. And I will not turn, become a traitor to my allegiance to God. And then, again, so help me God. And so we do need the help of God to stay firm in our identity. We do need the help of God to stay firm in understanding the privileges and responsibilities we have as citizens of heaven and citizens with all the saints, as Paul says. And again, I think it's a very, very powerful metaphor, very powerful kind of this kind of connection as citizens of the United States. But again, more so than being a citizen of the United States, we are citizens of God's kingdom, and we take that seriously.
Then in the closing couple verses of chapter 2, Paul uses the analogy of the church being a building.
Yeah.
In him, the whole building being put together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him, you are also being built together for God's dwelling in the Spirit. And particularly in verse 22, that I think it's always important for us to remind ourselves that so often, our American mindset, we read you, meaning you're talking about me as an individual, because we're so independently minded. But Paul, more often than not, and even in Jesus too, when they are saying you, it is a plural you. It's meaning everyone together.
Absolutely.
So in him, you, or I've heard somebody say, like, if we were from the South, they'd say you all, or y'all. That's really how we should say it. In him, y'all are also being built together for God's dwelling in the Spirit. There is no solo Christianity. It is not designed for us to do this on our own. We are God's temple. We all together are God's temple.
Yeah, and so again, I think we will see it again in Ephesians. No, I think it's in 1 Corinthians where there is that distinction that my body is a temple individually, but then the body of Jesus is, as you mentioned, is the collective temple, and in that, in the body of Jesus, that collective temple, we now become the new dwelling place of God. So the way we act, the way we think, our attitudes, our actions, what we say, should reflect that God is actually dwelling in our midst. The way we treat one another, so we don't gossip about one another. We don't bite one another. Again, that spiritual. I think it's in Galatians. I think Galatians Paul talks about that in Galatians. So we don't harm one another. Why? Because this body is a sacred place where the Spirit of God dwells. We would not dare go to the temple in the Old Testament or even in the New Testament and desecrate it with certain things. So why would we do that in the body of Jesus where God dwells? So the way we treat one another is super, super important, and it proves that we truly believe that God is dwelling in our midst. So when I hurt you, I ask for your forgiveness. When you hurt me, you ask for my forgiveness, because that's what it means for God to dwell in our midst. If you're hurting, I weep with you. When you're rejoicing, I rejoice with you, because that's what it means for God to dwell in our midst. And I think when we take that seriously, that God is actually present, we will treat one another differently. We will treat our membership in the body of Jesus differently as we move forward. So we are, in fact, the new temple, individually and also collectively.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this episode, what can we believe about God, ourselves, and others from Ephesians 2:11 to verse 22?
Yeah, we're going to hear this over and over again, that God was so gracious to bring us near. Like we were far off, and God brought us near. And it wasn't because we deserved it. It wasn't because of our family upbringing, our background, our privilege. It was because of God's grace. He graciously brought us near, and I'm grateful for that. Mm-hmm. And for me, is that I have a responsibility to work for the peace that God has already given us in Jesus, and what that means. Keep short accounts if there are issues within the body of Jesus, because He dwells among us, and I want to make room and facilitate His dwelling in the proper way.
Yeah. Just standing out to me that Christ is our peace.
Yeah.
When think of whether that's external turmoil or internal turmoil and tension, that He is our peace, that we can look to Him, we can rest in Him. That's very powerful to me. And for myself and others, I'm really struck by the naturalization oath and just the parallels of that, of, yes, the amazing privilege it is to be a citizen with the saints, and also the responsibilities and the commitment that comes with that, and taking that a little more seriously. That just the ceremony of it is striking me today. So thank you for enlightening us with that. And thank you for joining us, friends. If you have not already, encourage you to join the Believe podcast listeners group in Trinity's app. We would love to have conversation, continue there with you, with each other, what insights you get from the passages, questions that you might have. We would love to carry on this conversation with you there in Trinity's app in the Believe podcast listeners group. Take care and have a great week.